Hello, everyone. Um, Thank you for coming back to my podcast. Um, this is October 22nd, day 16 of the Israel-Hamas war. Um, and today I'm going to be monologuing a bit, just giving you sort of my take on what's been happening, a few points that I think are worthy of note. Um, in general, other than a few things that I'll mention, things are not haven't yet erupted. Okay. Everybody is in the country, I think, is sort of very tense because things are heating up, but we haven't yet started the ground invasion into Gaza. People are wondering if it's going to happen, if it won't. I'm convinced that it will. It just whatever the external stressors and pressures there are on the government internally, anything other than a ground invasion that will prove to the people that we've really decimated the offensive capabilities of Hamas. Anything less than that will just be unacceptable uh, politically, internally. If there was some way to do that from the air, some way to do that, and completely disarm Hamas, maybe there would be a way to do that without a ground invasion, but very unlikely that such a thing is possible. And so everybody's just waiting. And in the meantime, Hezbollah in the north is heating up the area, but yet to have really shown that it wants to engage fully. Israel is also responding in kind with more strength, but yet nothing um, clear on that front just yet. And also there was a soldier that was killed today in Gaza when they were starting to do some initial incursions in, I guess, just to scout the area, though I haven't done any research to see why. They were already slightly inside the Gaza, within the Gaza border. Um, but yes, but a soldier was killed, and and it's not going to be, unfortunately, the last. Um, yeah. So since today, so we're all just waiting. I'll give you some of the updates of things that are happening surrounding this, and also a little bit of a deeper inside look into the way things are working out in other non-military areas in Israel. So, first of all, you might have heard that there were two hostages that were released. They were American citizens, Israeli American, and I've tried to find online information more about, more information about what they went through and what they're saying, but I haven't found it, and I'm guessing that they're still being debriefed. I believe that they also, met Biden, being American citizens, they might have gone back to America for the time being, and I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm a little bit, I have a bit of a runny nose today. So anyway, they, I'm sure that we'll get information eventually about what it was like, and the security forces will try to milk them for information about where they were kept, and how they were held. But of course, we're very happy that two people were released. There are still over 200 prisoners, not prisoners, hostages that were kidnapped, including children. Um, Still quite unthinkable that Hamas actually is holding children, babies, as hostages. Um, and so this is far from being over in terms of the hostage situation. Next, still in the fighting arena, there was an Israeli attack last night in Jenin. And Jenin is not part of Gaza. Jenin is part of what's called the West Bank, which I'm assuming you all know, but basically there are two areas which are controlled by the Palestinians. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, and the West Bank, which is just called that way because it's a section that is on the west bank of the Jordan River. So that is on the east side of Israel, whereas Gaza is on the west and has a coastline. So a city called Jenin, it's been a hotbed of terror in the past. Many years ago, there was actually a big operation that Israel did to go in and completely demilitarize the area. But since then, of course, many years have passed, and it's once again grown into this hotbed of terror. So Israel discovered that there was a unit of terrorists. I believe that they were both Hamas and Islamic Jihad that were getting organized there for in order to conduct another terror attack on one of the towns or settlements in the area. And Israel took a preemptive strike and attacked there, and basically killed the team that, from what I understand, were also responsible for previously conducting terror attacks in October. Earlier in October, before all this erupted. And the significance of this is double. The first one is that they were conducting their base of operation from within a mosque. Okay, so the mosque was being used not only as a place of prayer, but also as a base of operation for planning terrorist attacks. They had, from what I saw, small pieces of footage. I'm guessing we had intelligence that had gone in there and took pictures. They had television screens and computers and all sorts of other equipment inside. And they were doing this thing that I mentioned before, basically trying to use the Geneva Convention, or what's called the Prohibition Against War Crimes, as a weapon, right? Preventing Israel from attacking. Israel usually is careful with these things, but this time, being a war, we took action and hopefully prevented many lives lost by these terrorists executing their plan. And the second significance of this is that it wasn't Jenin. It wasn't part of the West Bank. So, years ago, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority separated. This is one thing that people don't understand many times, that are not part of Israel, that are not in Israel. But, in the 90s, in the Oslo Accords, so there was one Palestinian Authority, and they were in charge of both Gaza and the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria. And when eventually, at the beginning, Hamas wasn't even allowed to run for elections because they were a terrorist organization. But at some point, the Americans pressured the Israelis to let the Hamas participate in an election. We said fine, and then Hamas won. And then they specifically won in Gaza, and a year later they basically took over Gaza, meaning there was a big firefight between them and the PLO, which is the, let's say, founding organization of the Palestinian Authority, and they kicked them out of Gaza, which is why now there's really a split political ruling class, or split political entity. Okay, there's no longer a single Palestinian Authority. There's Hamas that rules in Gaza, and there's the PLO that rules in the West Bank, or the Palestinian Authority. Anyway, the significance of this, therefore, is that Israel was noting that the Hamas was actually trying to build an additional front, let's say, to start a new front from within the West Bank to attack Israel, and we took action there as well. So this is just so you understand a little bit of the complexity of the issue. It's not only Gaza that poses a threat, it's also the area within the West Bank, which is also seething with a lot of tension, as some of the Arabs there would like to. I apologize, by the way, I'm somewhat, I have a bit of a runny nose today. But many of the Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank also want to join their Gazan brethren and join the Hamas and fight. And so Israel has to also pay attention that additional terror attacks don't come out from there as well. Though, for the most part, things have been relatively quiet over there. Not quiet, but relatively. Okay. The other two things I want to point out and share with you. First is something that, this is not about Israel, but it is about the war and some of its offshoots. This may be preliminary. We don't, of course, know all the details, but I'm assuming that by now you've heard that in Detroit there was a female president of a shul, a woman who was the president of a shul, of a synagogue, who was murdered. She was stabbed multiple times, I believe, outside her house, and she was found dead. Her name was, I believe, Samantha Wall, Woll, and she was the president of her synagogue, also part of a lot of interfaith work between Jews and Muslims. But she was murdered, and the police are still investigating, so we don't know uh, if the murder is related or not related to this period. But at least considering all the extreme protests that we've seen around the world, this might indeed be a related event, a related incident, and we'll let the police, the Detroit police, figure out what happened there. But I'm just mentioning this now, even though we don't know for sure that it's related, because it definitely would fit in to the atmosphere that we're seeing around, right? Very heated protests all around the West, and when anybody shows up with, Israeli flag or something like that, they are attacked and shouted at, and in such an atmosphere, when people are spreading stories about Israel attacking hospitals, you never know what some person might do. Again, I'm not saying that this is a case of anti-Semitic, hate crimes, but I'm just saying it's the kind of thing that we need to be paying attention to, and if it happens, to make note of it. This connects to something that Jews feel around the world a lot of times, is that people sometimes say, well, there's a difference between criticizing Israel and maybe even being anti-Zionist versus being anti-Semitic. And in theory, there could be people that really, there for sure could be criticism of Israel. Israel is a country. We make mistakes like any other country. And so that's for sure. But even to be anti-Zionist, one may be anti-Zionist, maybe not be anti-Semitic. But you could see that across, like if you look at this instance, or even look just at Sydney, right, where a week ago, I believe, or a week and a half ago in Sydney, in Australia, people were protesting, and they were saying F the Jews, and even gassed the Jews right outside the Sydney Opera House in this thing. So in many people's minds, in anti-Semites' minds, there is a clear connection between Jews and Israel, right, in the state of Israel. And so the slippery slope, right, is there. That does not mean that people cannot criticize Israel, as I said before, but it does mean that there is a slippery slope, at least once you get to condoning violence against civilians in Israel. It's not a far stretch, if you really believe that, to see other Jews who, let's say, support Israel or donate to Israel as being your enemy as well. And that's, of course, tragic, but it is the age-old story of the Jewish people, unfortunately. So I'm just pointing it out. You should pay attention, to these things. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about Israeli politics. So, while this operation is ongoing, there's also a lot of politics happening under the surface. And I, in general, try to avoid that at these times, because I feel I need most of my energy to be focused on the war effort and, supporting the troops. And one of the things about this period is that even though there are huge political tensions in the country that were there before this war, everybody understands that this is really a war for our standing in this region, for our survival in this region. Because if you're not strong, you're weak, and if you're not weak, you're basically going to be easy prey. And that we must avenge what happened. We must ensure that we deter any further attempts, and then we, of course, must return the hostages if we can. And so there is a very strong sense of unity in the country right now. But at the outskirts, politicians and columnists and their operatives, like the political operatives, they still they still, get up in the morning and do their job. And there still are, of course, people that are, um, let's say, uh, funneling a lot of the energy that they're getting from these terrible events into that effort. So I'm going to give you a few pieces here that are important that might help you understand some of the stuff you might see later on as the war continues and as things settle down. I'll start with the small things. First of all, there is at least one ministry and perhaps two or more that will be closing down. So obviously, this is taking a huge toll on the economy, and we need to divert a lot of resources to where it's really important, right? That means the army, that means to the social services to support all the people that got hurt, their family, whole communities were ripped apart and destroyed, and there really is so much that we need to heal from. And there is a call to the government to cut back on other things. Now, this is especially important in Israel because the government is extremely bloated. The way the political system works in Israel, unlike, let's say, the U.S., is more like in Britain, where you vote for a parliament, and then from the parliament you create your cabinet, your government. And this is unlike in America, where there's a complete separation between the executive and the legislative. Here, the legislative is where the most of the executive branch comes from. And what that means is also that if you want to have control over something executive, you have to go through the parliament. So a lot of times there will be MPs, right, the cabinet, Congress members, who will really only want to be in the legislative body because they see it as a stepping stone to become part of the executive body. And many times, because of political expediency, there are cases where you create a ministry that starts, slicing off pieces of other ministries just so there could be an excuse for somebody to get a certain position. And this is a well-known weakness of the Israeli system. And over the course of the past several governments, it has been abused tremendously. And of course, each one of these ministries doesn't just come with a title; it comes with a budget to do things, right? And the person who's a minister gets, driven around. They get like a driver and a car and all these other things. So the public is always very upset. But every political party that has come into power has done this because, for reasons which maybe I'll get into in future episodes, over the past few years, the political system has been somewhat fragile. Not that the country was fragile, but political stability was fragile. Political stability didn't actually exist. It wasn't stable. So in order to keep things stable, people would appoint people, for Netanyahu, let's say, would appoint people to be in these like bogus ministries. And so now that things are serious, some of these ministers are saying, you know what, I really don't need this. I'm willing to step aside for the good of the country. And this is both a blessing because people are seeing what's important, and also in the sense of admission that a certain role was not really needed and you had it only for political reasons. So this is, of course, a form of admission of guilt on the one hand, but also it's good to see that the politicians are able to put what's important and what's good for the country in front of their own political advantages when the time calls for it. So, people are reacting in different ways to this event. The second thing I want to talk about is Bibi. So Bibi Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, our prime minister, has been around for over a decade as a prime minister, with a short break like 2 years ago. And he was the center of so much of the political storm that was raging over here for several years already. Again, I'll get into it maybe some other time when I have another one of these lulls to give you some context, because it really is a fascinating story of how you can have a perfect political storm that sends the entire country into some sort of a tailspin, which is where we were before this whole thing happened. And so Netanyahu has not yet said that he takes responsibility for the failures of the government, the failures of the uh, military establishment to prevent the horrible massacres of October 7th. Now, this is not uncommon for Bibi to sort of wait out and not come and take responsibility, and many of his detractors claim that he has sort of lost touch with the actual public. Those that support him say he'll say it when he's getting ready, and right now we're focusing on fighting, meaning fighting not internally, but fighting Hamas, right? We're now in combat. But this is a big issue, right? Because it feeds into the left's feeling that that once again we can see how self-centered, egotistical Bibi Netanyahu is, and the right, which tends to protect its leaders, says this is just a sign that he doesn't want to fall into your trap. The moment he says those words, you guys are going to call for his resignation, and we still have to do a deeper analysis of what happened. Every moment you have a chance, you call for his resignation. So he's simply not letting you have the pleasure of doing that, using his own words. But I do think that this goes to a deeper issue that will be going on for a while as this war goes on and even afterwards. Now, I mentioned this, I think, in my first episode, but there, I'm not sure if it was as well structured, so I thought I would point it out again now, and hopefully this will frame for you some of the things that are going to go on in the future. So, you have to understand that this is going to be an earthquake politically, and even deeper than politically, culturally, for both sides of the political aisle, and for the whole country in general, even if they were in the middle of the aisle. Because you have this really amazing prime minister, amazing in the sense that he's been around forever, practically, and very charismatic guy, has achieved a lot in his time, that a lot of people on the right are very proud to call their prime minister, their leader. And he's been attacked by the left and by a lot of other, let's call it, if we take the perspective of the right for now, okay? I'm telling the story from the perspective of the right wing. So the judicial establishment and the media have been attacking him again and again, and trying to find ways to basically smear him with all sorts of false allegations, and he's been in court for all sorts of things, and slowly you can see that the court cases are falling apart, and it's all proof that the establishment is corrupt, and there's a deep state that is basically out to get him. So the right is rallying around their leader and not letting anybody, get rid of him whenever they try to. And the left sees Netanyahu as corrupt, as a classic example of how power corrupts, of somebody who may have done some good stuff in the past, but some of them won't even give him that. But even those that will say he's changed, he's become sort of too in love with power. He gets, cigars from donors, and just gives them whatever they want in return. And he has been in power for too long, and has to be kicked out because he's corrupt and he's breaking the law and he's just tearing the country apart. So this was all happening for several years now, up until this event. And while it's clear to us that we have to destroy Hamas, the fact that Netanyahu is still leading the country makes it, very difficult for many people, right? Because you want to feel you're in good hands. But these people genuinely believe that he is a terrible prime minister. And I'm not going into what I think. I'm just giving you it like from an anthropological angle. Um, and and so this creates a lot of tension, which is why at the beginning of this war, there was a very strong push to create a unity government or an emergency unity government, which basically meant that another major party from the opposition, who until now would not sit with Netanyahu's party under any circumstances as long as he was in the lead, they agreed to join forces and form a new coalition which included them for the duration of the war. That was extremely important because it meant that now there were representatives of the other side of the aisle in the government. And so a sense of unity could be made, it could be achieved. But everybody understands that it's a sense of unity only in the sense that we are fighting for our survival and should work together. That's already super important, but it doesn't mean that all the other things have disappeared. It's not that now people look at Bibi and say, oh, he's so amazing. And it's not like the right is saying, oh, he's terrible because he failed to see this attack coming. Okay? People on the right are focusing more on the military establishment, which should have, whether it's intelligence or the units that were on call at the time, that they should have been ready. And so there will be a reckoning, right, after the war. And most likely, in my opinion, Netanyahu won't last. First of all, he's been around for a long time. This is a huge failure for him. It's not just a failure of this specific event. It's a failure of a lot of the things he was leading in terms of containing Hamas and, managing the situation rather than taking a more offensive position on it. And the left is going to have to deal with the fact that even if Bibi goes, a lot of the policies that he was following were light versions of what they really wanted to do, which would have given Hamas even more control and more power in the region, so that even if, like say, the right loses one of its most effective leaders, the left is going to lose its, let's say, its roadmap, right? Like where do we go from here? That's going to be a very big question. And maybe next time I'll talk about some of the options, right? But it's not easy to figure out what do you do, right? What do you do with 2 million people that are at least, if not looking to kill you, are supporting, are happy to support a regime that all it wants to do is, Hamas, all it wants to do is to combine all its resources and focus them all on creating a killing machine of its Israeli neighbor. So it's a complicated question. What do we do? This is sort of why I also say that this war is going to, and its aftermath are going to be completely reshaping everything about this country and about the region. About the region because we're going to be redefining how we relate to the Palestinians, at least in Gaza, and for the country because Netanyahu will probably leave, and that will itself create a lot of let's say mess in the political scene, but also because each and every one of these political groups will have to sort of figure out again what they believe in, what are the policies they put forth before the people, and convince the people that they actually have something to say that will work and not just more of the same, which has clearly failed. So yeah, I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of how the politics here work, and I'll give you a bit more as the episodes continue. I guess I'll just end with one last point. So today I heard a video of a legal expert debating a BBC anchor about the issue of war crimes and Israeli war crimes. I thought it was a very, very well executed. This British, I think her title is a barrister, but I may be wrong. But she's a legal expert. Really sort of laid it out clearly and in a way that made it, very straightforward that Israel is working within its rights, even if it puts pressure on the civilian population to, let's say, leave Gaza, etc. Everything is within international law. And since the BBC has been extremely anti-Israel up until now, it was personally very satisfying to see somebody which has all the facts and is honest and comes and, in a sense, sets things straight for the record. So I'm going to add the link to that in the description of this video, and you're welcome to watch it if you want. It's like 8 minutes, so I hope you enjoy that. Thank you very much, and until tomorrow. Bye-bye. Stay safe.